Welcome to Cracking the Coaching Code. I'm Michael Waddington, a best-selling author, entrepreneur, lawyer, and leadership coach.
And I'm Gonzalez, Galeano, entrepreneur, former banker, and leadership coach. We love coaching people and helping them awaken their gifts within. Together, we have a mission and goal to help coaches build a successful coaching practice. Join us every week on the first and third Wednesday of every month as we bring to you knowledge, findings, and research that will help you propel your coaching practice to levels you've never seen before. I'm overly excited about this week's guest. Every week, we will bring to our class professionals who either have built a successful business practice. Most of us become coaches because we want to impact other people's lives. And our guest today, Max Levine, he's a successful lawyer who's built a practice in the Fort Lauderdale area, but he's also have other businesses that he's been successful at. So I'm excited about his experience as an entrepreneur, but also his knowledge about how businesses should start on the legal part of the 5 business vitals to make sure that they minimize risk and maximize profitability. So, Max, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
So, Max, before we get started, and so we have some perspective about your background and experience, just give us a brief overview of why you're the guy to talk about this topic of entrepreneurship and building a company. Tell us a little bit about your background, if you would.
Sure. So I've been a lawyer since 2006, and I started my career clerking at the United States Tax Court in Washington, D.C., and then I worked for a very large law firm down here, essentially holed up in a windowless room looking at the tax code and trying to figure out loopholes for Fortune 500 companies. Did that for a while, did not love it, and then ultimately decided to become an entrepreneur. And I built a non-law business. So I actually built a car wash company over the course of 7 years, and did everything from, running the finances and marketing strategies and creating the procedures and hiring and firing and fixing hydraulic equipment. So for about 7 years. And then ultimately earlier this year, I sold that company to a private equity group and had a successful exit there, and very happy to have made that transaction as well. So knowing that I was kind of going to sell that company, I anticipated that about 2 years ago. I realized that I could kind of merge what I enjoyed about being an entrepreneur and what I enjoyed about being an attorney and go back into business law. So I opened my practice, which is just the law offices of Max Levine here in Fort Lauderdale, catering to entrepreneurs and small businesses and internet startups, tech startups. So that's gone fairly well. It's been very enjoyable to me because I get to work with people that I enjoy. I enjoy helping either them avoid certain problems that seem to crop up at all levels of entrepreneurship, or just propel them a little bit further and keep them focused on what's going to make their companies great. So that involves a lot of different areas of law, entity formation, taxes, employment law, intellectual property, contracts, a lot of things that we can touch on briefly today that are really important, particularly for beginning entrepreneurs to have some understanding of.
Okay, so when you talked about problems of entrepreneurship, let's go back to the beginning. Like, what are some of the things that, if you had 1 minute to explain to the audience, and I'm putting you on the spot here, but tell us what someone who's considering getting into or starting their own business or being an entrepreneur really have to think through and decide on before launching the business. What are the major pitfalls?
Yeah, there are specific legal topics that come up, but even before I get to those, there's kind of two things that I really want to make sure that people understand the importance of before they even get to those specific topics. And we kind of talk about the beginning ones chronologically in rough order, how they come up. But the two things that I want people to keep focused on from the legal end of their business, kind of from day one, is number one, just never have an unclear, unwritten business relationship with anybody. And that's especially important in the beginning, where you may be divulging information that's your secret sauce to somebody where you don't have a non-disclosure or non-use agreement in place. You may just be talking to your roommate and trying to throw some ideas against the wall and see how they respond. That roommate may think that he or she is a partner in your business and may think that whatever contributions they make are integral to your growth. So it's very important early on to just make sure that you're writing down and on the same page in those agreements with the people that you're dealing with, whether it's a potential customer, vendor, potential partner, co-founder. All of those agreements, I hate to be the wet blanket, but they need to be written down, and you need to make sure that you're on the same page, because that's where you see some of the biggest problems occur. So that's kind of like if I could tattoo something on everybody's palm, that would be the tattoo number one is don't have unwritten, unclear business agreements with people or business relationships with people. And then the other super boring, but really fundamental aspect of being an entrepreneur is from day one, internally have those books and records. So if you got to be on some kind of accounting software. You have to be memorializing, hey, even if it's keeping a little audio journal at the end of the day, hey, here's what I spent, here's what I spent it on, here's what I took in, here's what I sold, here's what I did, here's what I talked to, and here's what we talked about. That could be 5 minutes a day. But having those records in place from day one means that you're able to pull them up 5 years later. And that could occur in any kind of context, whether it's an IRS audit or selling your business. You're going to need those records, and you're going to need to prove what money came in and out of your business and why. And you're definitely going to want to analyze your business for financial purposes and understand, hey, how can I bring more to the bottom line? And unless you have your house in order early on, when it's really, really easy to do that, it's very easy to develop bad habits, which become either legal or financial problems later on. So those are the two annoying and fun things that I try to tell everybody is don't have unwritten business relationships and try to develop good habits of keeping books and records early on.
So Max, you made me think about our audience, and there's different routes that they can go depending on how they want to build on their practice, because they could be going internally or they can go externally. Like in our case, some of us have left our previous career to enlist ourselves into this new venture of coaching. And so taking into consideration that it's probably going to be more than less solopreneurs. So a lot of us made that mistake of combining the personal with the business finances, which, as a former banker, I saw it all the time. And so to your point, I used to tell my clients, keep your records straight and to make sure that that your business pays you off so you can understand whether you're actually making money or not. So how do you reroute those solopreneurs? So what's the next step? I already decided that I'm going to leave corporate America and I'm going to open this coaching practice. And what do I do?
Right. So chronologically, the first two issues that come up are usually trademark and entity formation. And so trademark is, hey, what are you going to call your business? And this is something Victor and I have discussed. You're going to develop a brand, particularly as a coach. It may be your name, but it may not be your name. You may have some concept some phrase or logo that you want to be identified with and that you want to put time and resources and money behind. Step number one is making sure that nobody else owns the right to that. So doing a trademark search before you decide that that's what you want to call yourself, your business, your product, whatever it may be. So trademark search and then registering that trademark are kind of chronologically the first things I tell people to address, because I see so many people making mistakes in this area where they're already putting scarce resources to developing that brand. And then they come to me and I have to tell them, hey, wait, somebody else owns the rights to that. Alternatively, the other thing you want to be aware of in trademark is that while somebody else may own the rights to a particular mark, you may also not be able to defend a generic mark or a descriptive mark. So if the name of your company is, coaching for dentists, you're not going to be able to use that phrase and to prevent other people from using that phrase because it's purely descriptive, and the U.S. Trademark Office and fundamentally the law will not allow you to own that phrase. So you want to have something that's distinctive, and just without going too deep into it, you want to think of the words fanciful or arbitrary, so Zippo or Zoom. And you want something that nobody else is using. And that does take a little bit of homework, or potentially hiring an attorney to make sure that you have the right trademark. So the first thing is branding is always important in the modern era. Make sure that you can own and protect that brand. And then the second step is pretty much every entrepreneur should be using a business entity. It's very rare when I see circumstances that it doesn't make sense to do business as an LLC or a corporation. Some cases, some other entities like a B Corp. And what that means is basically you have an entity like a corporation or an LLC that the law regards as a person separate from you, the individual. And the advantage there is primarily that if the business owes money, you don't owe that money. And if you owe money, the business doesn't owe that money. And that accrues to all kinds of liabilities, including potentially if an employee of yours gets hurt or hurts somebody else. So in the course of doing work for that business, those things are very, very important to create that separation. Here in Florida, I think a judgment can last for 10 years. So if you're doing business as an individual and there's some liability and somebody gets a judgment against you, that's something that could kind of be an albatross around your neck for a very long time. So it's important to create that very, very kind of simple form of insurance by creating that entity. And there can be tax advantages too. So for service-based entrepreneurs like coaches, although sometimes this is not the case, it is absolutely worth talking to an attorney or an accountant to discuss these issues. You can have an LLC that's taxed as an S Corp, or you could just be taxed as an S Corp in different kinds of entities. And that allows you to protect some of your income from certain types of taxes, like employment taxes. So there are tax strategies that you can employ as well in the context of business entities. So there's both tax and liability reasons for doing business as a business entity. There's all kinds of other reasons as well. If you want to sell your business at some point, it is much easier to do that if your business is held in a business entity.
So, Max, you mentioned a couple of times so far about talking to an attorney, and this is something that Victor and I had run into a lot with some of the coaches that we know. They're on a budget, right? And
sure.
They want to do things kind of half-hearted, half-assed. and so they're like, oh, I'm just going to go online and get a document, or I'm just going to talk to my buddy who took a tax course 5 years ago, and I'm going to get it started that way. And that makes me cringe because, like, whenever I started, when we moved to a different state and we started, our law firm in a different state, my wife and I, the first thing we did was call a lawyer, and we're lawyers, and we called an accountant, a qualified accountant that we could personally work with and get their advice to make sure we're doing it right. So, I mean, do you have any tips or suggestions for people that think that they can do it themselves in terms
Yeah, Listen, I'm a lawyer, right? So, and entrepreneurs hire me, so I'm biased, but I have seen all kinds of mistakes by people who are remarkably and extraordinarily talented and competent within their fields playing junior lawyer or accountant. I have clients that I want to strangle sometimes because they are hurting themselves far more than my bills will if they had asked me this early on. So it's generally, there are resources out there. Sometimes you will have law firms that may have relationships with a professional organization where you can talk to them or you can get information from them that's very, very relevant to what you're doing so that you can narrow down the questions that you have in your individual case. But it is extremely important to have some kind of relationship with a competent business attorney and a competent accountant, honestly, from day one. And there are resources to make this a little bit less onerous. You can have like a fractional bookkeeper situation, and some of those are great. You can learn QuickBooks on your own if you're up to it. That's a phenomenal way to keep track of your business. But there are people in life who can keep you focused on what makes you great. And a good business attorney and a good accountant are the people who, as you're going 100 miles an hour towards what makes you great and just being fueled by that, they're making sure that you're not heading towards a brick wall. And they're watching out to the sides for things that you may not see. And that's how you want to view your business. So yes, it is an investment to talk to an accountant or an attorney early on. But if you find the right person, it's well worth it.
Max, I know that you mentioned that entrepreneurs reach out to you, and of course you're biased on your response. But at the end of the day, your point is well taken, and you're the foundation of every successful business, because the reality is everything can be a risk, not only for the business but also on the personal side, if the foundation is not done properly. You mentioned LLC corporation. I know that there's differences in how a solopreneur or entrepreneur should go through. Without going into too much detail, is there a particular route that the coaches should look into, more into, less than, based on your recommendation?
It's going to be case by case. A lot of small businesses prefer to form as an LLC just because there is less formality attached to them. So corporations are an older form of business with a little bit more formality. You have bylaws, you have required meetings, you have a little bit more paperwork and kabuki, a little bit more, pre-scripted theater that's required of corporations. Whereas in Florida, for instance, if you have a single member LLC, there's almost nothing required by law for that entity to be respected. But there are plenty of situations where a corporation makes more sense, or where it might, because it's an older phenomenon, it might yield a more certain result. The law is very, very well developed, particularly in states like Delaware, about what happens when you do X in a corporation. It frequently is not as developed with regard to LLCs.
Yeah, and mainly you bring up something important. Mainly, we're dealing with individuals in Florida, right? Because the law is going to change depending on the state. So, what I'd like us to get to a point where we're writing like a roadmap. Okay, so what are things that I gotta do if I'm going to build a successful business practice? And I go back to the 5 vitals, right? And one of the vitals is going to be legal foundation. This is why you're here first. Right? What do we need to do? We talk about branding and how important it is. So get the trademark going. And you can do, of course, the trademark, because there are different lawyers that do that, and some others don't. Your office does do that. As a matter of fact, keep in mind. So trademark, branding is important for your marketing. Then identify the entity, LLC. sounds like case to case. LC will probably will make more sense for a solopreneur, for coaches. We know that we're doing this to minimize risk and to maximize on tax liabilities. What is next? So what do we need to do next?
Yeah. So from here, it gets a little less sequential, or the chronology changes. So you do want to, a part of the entity formation is also a decision you're making with regard to taxes. So there are elections about how that entity will be taxed. That's kind of, there's a grid. There's what business entity are you forming? So the main two are corporation and LLC. Then there's how it's going to be taxed. I'm not going to get into that. It's just a little bit complicated. S corp does make a lot of sense in many circumstances, but it's not always a good fit. And then you have a lot of issues that come up when you start doing business. So some of the more important ones are contracts with your customers. So if you have clients and customers, you do need to have agreements with them. Thankfully, in your case, for professional coaches, there are professional organizations that actually have some pretty good contracts that you should definitely consider using as a starting point. I think Victor and I have seen that from different coaching organizations where they offer their members some legal resources, and the contracts that they have are a great place to start and to become aware of the issues that you might have with your customers. Similarly, another kind of day one issue, as opposed to like a day zero or day -1, is insurance. You do want to be mindful that business insurance can solve a lot of problems. So whether it's, in your office, having a small business occupancy policy, or liability, it does make sense. And again, that's something that professional organizations can with as well. So those are kind of early issues that I see frequently.
So I have
two things, and thank you for sharing that. So you and I reviewed the contracts that ICF Global offers to its members, and it can be contracts that you're doing with either the individual, the coachee, or contracts that you're doing with the organization that may be hiring you to coach its employees. So two different contracts there. And then insurance liability. I feel like I'm doing a commercial for ICF. Yes, you get a discount as well. It's one of the benefits of being an ICF Global member, by identifying that insurance liability that is going to work for you. It all depends on how small or big. Well, question: how do I pick an insurance liability? How do I know which one is the best for me?
Generally speaking, talk to an agent who preferably one who's familiar with your industry. That usually they can talk the talk and understand what issues actually come up, as opposed to things that are totally theoretical and not practical. That's what I would say.
Okay, fair enough.
I do have a question. I want to go back to the beginning, because something you said kind of hit a nerve with me. You talked about talking to friends and roommates and all that, and delineating who's doing what, who's part of what business. Because when I started my law practice, when I got out of the Army with my wife, a buddy of mine from the Army joined our law firm, and we did not follow your advice. So it was my wife and I and this other lawyer who was just a coworker from the Army, who was a lawyer. And within 6 months, it was a disaster. We didn't really lay out who owned what furniture we brought in. We funneled a lot of money into the business because this lawyer didn't have the money for various reasons. And it was like, oh, don't worry, once we start making money, you can pay us back. And then there was hurt feelings over who owned the website, who owned the name. All of these issues became an issue. So what do you recommend? So let's say someone like Victor and I coaching, we're like, hey, man, let's get a website together and save money. This is hypothetical. We're not doing this, and we're like, let's save money and let's go to the lawyer together. And then you put in $500 and I'll put in $500. What problems could you see developing, if we don't clearly lay out who owns what, who owns the website. I mean, how would that turn out, let's say a year down the road, or maybe 5 years down the road? Let's say he's making a ton of money and I'm not, and I'm mad at him and jealous of him. What legal problems could you see coming from that?
I mean, pretty much anything you can imagine can and has happened as a result of those types of situations. So I have something that I use for my tech startup clients. It's called the co-founder conversation, and it's basically a 3-page PDF that I give them. I think you can find it on my website, maxlevinelaw.com/blog. It's somewhere there. And I recommend that whenever there are co-founders or people thinking about becoming partners in some respect, that they go out to dinner, have a bottle of wine together, and go through these questions to make sure that they have the same understanding of who's putting in what, who's getting out what happens if things go wrong, and what happens if things go really, really, really right. And so frequently, people are afraid to have those conversations early on that they don't realize that their expectations are not in the same place. So I've seen situations like yours where you'll have someone who contributed virtually nothing to the success of an organization, but who has legitimate legal claim to own assets of the business that are fundamental to the business, and may have the right to make very, very important decisions about something about which that person may have been entirely irresponsible and potentially detrimental for several years. So get those agreements in place. The last thing you want to do, right, is succeed and then get dragged down because you didn't plan for success. And I see that happen all the time. And frequently it's because there's a lack of clarity about, for instance, an operating agreement in an LLC situation, specifying who gets to make what decisions and who owns what. Those types of situations are very common. The mistakes that you discussed, I see all the time. And they're a lot easier to prevent than to undo.
And that's something that you can help somebody in that particular situation as part of your legal counsel.
Yeah, I mean, we do both. So we can help, either mediate potentially or, solve a business dispute. But most importantly, we offer them, I think, the most value in helping plan for those situations and make sure that when there are two people working together as co-founders, partners, whatever the case may be, that they understand who's responsible for what and what happens if those responsibilities are not met, or what happens if they succeed. And it just creates a smoother road when everybody understands, how things are supposed to work from day one. So again, it's a little bit of, that ounce of prevention that's worth a pound of cure. That's where we try to give the most value.
Yeah, undoubtedly is that keyword of clarity. So speaking of coaching, getting to that clarity is going to be key. So I appreciate you sharing that. So we're on that roadmap: branding, trademark, entity, LLC, contracts, and operating agreements. What comes up next?
So as you develop your materials, I've gotten feedback from several coaches that they're finding that various people, and sometimes it's the people they're mentoring, are misusing the materials that the coaches create. So you may create an online course, or you may create a written document that you're providing to the people that you're coaching. And I have seen cases where those people themselves become coaches and either use those documents verbatim or something extraordinarily derivative thereof. So copyright law is kind of what protects you in this area. And copyright law, you want to make sure that you're aware of it in both offense and defense. So like, don't rip off other people's pictures from the internet. That's don't, when you're building your website, use royalty-free images. I like Unsplash. There are other sources, but don't use other people's material. Similarly, the reason you don't want to do that is because copyright law offers really effective protections to the authors and owners of material that can be protected by copyright. So you don't want to be on the, the business end of the cease and desist letter, but you do want to be able to send that when it's appropriate for you to tell people to stop using the intellectual property that you're creating, whether, in this case, copyright. And copyright can attach to all kinds of things, obviously, pictures, but coaching materials, written, coaching materials can be protected by copyright as well. So it's something that you want to consider potentially registering your work with the U.S. Copyright Office, but being very mindful that if you see your work being used by someone that you didn't authorize or in ways that you didn't authorize, that's something that you potentially want to talk to an attorney about.
How soon, I guess, should someone come to an attorney and say, well, look, I have an idea. I'm creating this course. I have this material, written material. It's not complete. How soon should they be knocking at your door?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm asking a question.
It's a great question. The nice thing about copyright is that, number one, your rights do kind of attach the moment you fix that material into a document or a picture or whatever the case may be, a video. But it's fairly cheap to register those copyrights at the U.S. Copyright Office. It's something you can do yourself, and you can do in bulk in some cases. For pictures, I think it's like $55 or $65 to register 750 unpublished pictures. And although you have those rights kind of the moment that you create it, when you register it, it really does bolster those rights. You have what's called statutory damages and potentially, we always like this, attorney's fees. So it makes it a lot cheaper for you to enforce your copyrights and a lot more effective if you register that work ahead of time.
So I have a question for you in this. So let's say I make a website and I go around town. I go around Miami taking beautiful pictures of palm trees. And then I put those palm tree pictures on my site, to show, just because they look pretty. And then I find out that somebody else is using those pictures even on their website or in ads or something like that. I mean, what recourse would I have?
Come talk to me. So you can sue over that. I literally am, sending out some very pointed letters about a case like that right now. For certain uses, if it's just sitting on a website somewhere, not in a commercial use, and if your use of it is not necessarily harmed by someone else's use of it, yeah, it's still worth a conversation with an attorney. But the damages in that case may not be huge.
Okay. And I want to bring up something else that I think is very important, and I did not know this. When I had our website created years ago, I used an image that was it was a picture that looked like someone snapped a photo of the front of Quantico Marine Base, right? And it was in Google. I found it on Google, or my web designer, someone did. And it was like a tiny little thumbnail that was put into my website. Never thought anything of it. About a year ago, I got a letter from some company. At first, I thought it was a scam because they were asking like $750.
The company was Pixie, right?
Yeah, they supposedly enforce all the AP rights and stuff like that.
Yeah. Pixie has made a business out of bulk enforcement of copyrights.
Okay.
So when I hear $750, I pretty much know who it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And so anyway, after back and forth and some threats and whatnot, I looked into it and I was like, you know what? They're probably going to get attorney's fees. I removed the picture immediately. But I think people have to be careful that just because something's in Google and it says it's not copyrighted, you have to be very careful. And you mentioned a website, and this is what I want to get to, for using images that I don't know what the term would be, that you're legally allowed to use.
Right, royalty-free images in this case, yeah. Search Google for royalty-free images, but I agree. You want that to be like whitelisted. You want to make sure that you know you're getting. If you're using somebody else's work, you want to make sure you know you have the rights to it. And I like Unsplash. They have some pretty hip images that I use on my website. There are plenty of sources for royalty-free images, and the reason you want to do that again is because of letters like you received. I have people come into my office at least once a month with a story like that. So I've gotten clients who have cease and desist letters from famous people's celebrities' estates because they made an Instagram post using this person as an example of a particular character trait, and they didn't have the authority to do that. Copyright law. The cool thing is that it protects your stuff really, really well. The problem is it protects everybody else's stuff really well too. So if you're using that stuff without permission, there's a very good chance you get a letter like that.
Okay.
So I have a question, because all of us get so excited about creating our own website. We're on a budget, right? So we sometimes even become web designers, even though that's not what we're great at. And some of us may do a good job. And that effort, we get pictures from the internet. And let's say that we collect those pictures from places that can be used. But what if? Is there a company, or will that lawyer is the one that does the audit to make sure that you're being risk-free and safe? How will I know? Because sometimes we think we did the right thing, but we might have picked one in error. So how do we know?
Yeah. Again, there's a few. This raises a couple of issues that are important for all kinds of beginning entrepreneurs. So if you're doing it yourself, go find those trusted sources of royalty-free images, and that's what I would recommend doing. If you are getting your website or and this applies to a lot of different material besides website, but if you're getting your website made by a contractor, I prefer to have in that agreement an indemnification provision that says, hey, if you contractor go grab some image from Google and I get that nasty letter saying that this image showed up on my website, that's not my financial problem. That's now your financial problem. So that's an agreement that I like to see in place whenever you have a contractor. And that does actually raise an important issue because beginning entrepreneurs frequently rely on contractors for a lot of different types of work. There are two things to be aware of with contractors that are kind of big ticket items. So one is when a contractor creates something for you that is creative and particularly something that's subject to copyright, you do want to make sure that you own that. It is not a simple matter to assume that if a contractor creates a piece of work for you, that you own it outright. That may not be the case without a written agreement that says so. So be aware of that. If you have a contractor creating a website for you, you may find an unintended result that you don't actually own the copyrights to those assets. And similarly with contractors, potentially with virtual assistants, certain cases, there's a very sticky issue as to whether they are employees or contractors. And that question has different meanings in different contexts. It can mean that you may need to have workman's comp insurance. It can mean, if it's an employee, it can mean that you may have to pay employment taxes and go through payroll as opposed to just cutting them a check and issuing a 1099. There's a lot of distinctions there. Unfortunately, it's one of the most annoyingly complicated distinctions in business law. The difference between an employee and a contractor, very state specific and just a very muddy area of law, but it does matter. So that's, again, another reason that you want to have that relationship with, a qualified business attorney, so you can ping them when these issues come up, and that hopefully you've been made aware of it at an early point.
Now we mentioned pictures, but we never really mentioned videos. Do they count as well? So
absolutely.
Pictures, videos, what else?
A copyright covers all kinds of stuff. A sound recording It can be a piece of choreography, a blueprint. There's pretty much anything that has a creative element to it and is fixed. So I can't copyright my speech, but I can copyright a recording of that speech, or I can copyright the transcript of that speech. So if it's fixed in a tangible medium of expression and it has kind of a creative element to it, it's more than just instructions or a recipe, then it can be subject to copyright. Certainly video, certainly audio recordings, certainly writing that, again, is more than instructional, and certainly pictures and visual works.
So for those of us that are creative and want to become web masters, so this is going to be key to make sure that we're creating our content, to make sure that we're not copywriting, we're not getting these issues in copywriting. That's awesome, Max. Thank you.
For sure.
Michael, anything that comes to mind?
Well, a lot of things were coming to mind. So I was going to ask you, like Canva, that's a very common, very inexpensive. It's like $14.99. I believe that you got to check the fine print, but I think those images in there, and there's some other royalty-free images have come down. But it freaked me out when I got that letter for the $750, because I'm like, I have a bunch of other images that are potentially out there, and I've hired people over the years. For many, many years, I've had this website, and so I basically removed everything. I removed all the images and went and got fresh, non-copyrighted images. Which was a major project, and it cost me a lot of money, but I didn't want to have to spend $750 for every single image on my website, which would have been a huge problem. So, I mean, that's just a small tip that people I think can avoid. But, for like Victor and I in our coaching world, a lot of people develop content, content like, let's say Victor develops a course, and it's going to be a 4-hour course on, making a business and being a coach or something like that. And he has PowerPoint slides. He has course materials. Is that something that he should register? And is that something that can be stolen, legally taken from him?
I recommend registering something that's important to your business, just because it makes it a little bit easier to enforce. If that's like the secret sauce of your business, and it need not be secret, but if that's the core of your business, then copyright registration is fairly cheap, fairly simple, and helps me say, hey, we're going to set a minimum amount of damages for any infraction that starts at $750 and goes up to $150,000 per copyright infringement. So it gives me, the lawyer for you, a lot more leverage in protecting the assets that are at the core of your business. And so, yes, you do have some protections under the law as soon as you write it down, but those are significantly bolstered if you register the copyright to those works. So if it's the core of your business and you have something that's making you money, then for a few bucks, generally we're talking like a small 3-digit number, you can significantly increase the protection of those assets by registering them.
Okay. And so in terms of the website development aspect of the business, do you also recommend that someone hires a professional to do that?
Yeah, you want somebody with a track record. And again, this comes down to keeping you focused on what's going to make you great. So if you have a friend who just started out in the business, they may not be aware of the kinds of problems that you just mentioned. If you have somebody who comes to you with a contract that's maybe 4 pages, looks fair, they've thought of issues that you haven't thought of, and they have a great track record, then that might prevent some of the issues that you discussed as well.
And Victor, I do have another question before you. I know you have one too. This has to do with the insurance, because we discussed this in our coaching class with the instructors multiple times. And at first I didn't understand, like, why would you need insurance if you're coaching? And so can you kind of give us an idea of like what types Like, what would insurance protect you from?
Yeah, there's all kinds of things. So a common occurrence might be if you have sensitive information about some of your mentees, if then, and you very well may, they're discussing very personal aspects of their business, and you get hacked, and that sensitive information is out there. That's a huge potential liability. It's not coaching, but I'm aware of a situation where a boudoir photographer, her cloud storage of all of her shoots got hacked. And she's in a lot of hot water with a tremendous number of people who trusted her with assets that they expected to stay private, typically between them, the photographer, and their significant other.
Yeah.
So sensitive information, cyber policies are very important. If somebody gets hurt on your premises, or they could blame your advice for their failure, and then come back at you and say that you're responsible for some of their business losses or personal mishaps. Insurance may be able to resolve some of those things and would be able to defend you in any lawsuit that occurs, and maybe pay out if that's necessary.
You know what? This reminds me of something that we discussed in the class recently, where the instructors warned us to not get into therapeutic matters. You know, if somebody comes to you and starts talking about they have problems with weight loss, or they've thought of suicide or something like that, and you're a coach, right? You're not a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, and you're over there giving them advice. If that person would happen to have some negative repercussions, or let's say they killed themselves, and then you find out, and then the family decides, we're going to sue coach because coach told, and I could see this happening. Some coaches, I mean, it's really an unregulated business, and some coaches think they're therapists, and some coaches are very highly qualified, and some are not qualified at all. And based on what I've seen, and I've even heard people on YouTube talking, like coaches, about natural medicine, and maybe talking to someone who's schizophrenic or something like that, and telling them they should go to a holistic approach, and they get off their meds and they kill someone, or they kill themselves. That could be a problem. I'm not sure if insurance would even cover that, but there are a lot of repercussions now that we think about it.
Yeah, no, I think particularly in the coaching business, because, you know, whatever you're coaching them for is very close to personal, psychological, potentially medical issues. You have a lot of potential unlicensed practice issues. So it is very important for coaches to know where to draw those lines. And I can't say that in every case that I'm familiar with where the lines will be drawn. That's a state-by-state definition as to what is medical advice and what is psychological advice. So it is something that I would expect people to take a look at.
So it's probably important to also have some of that in the contract, and have a professional help with that contract.
Yes, and disclaimers that, you know, obviously this is not medical advice, this is not psychological advice. You know, seek counsel for those issues. I think that's important. But again, you got to follow up those disclaimers with how you conduct yourself as well. So that won't protect you if you're telling them to get off their meds. Yeah,
Understood.
I mean, lots of great information. If there's any gift that we're giving to our listeners today, is the fact that in order for coaches to build a successful business, there's got to be a great foundation, and that gets started with the legal vital of every business. So I want to go back to the beginning. It's always good to start at the beginning, all right? So we talk about branding and the importance of getting the right trademark. Like in my case, personal will be in coaching center. Identifying which entity is going to work best, either an LLC or corporation, all of the above to minimize tax liabilities and maximize profitability. We touch different points on contracts and all kinds of contracts. In other words, contracts. Did I say contracts? Contracts. You have to make sure that you cover your cover your ass. That's it. Yeah, no other way to say it. And then Michael took us back to the importance of insurance and why is it important that a coach, regardless of the of the type of coach that one may be, to have insurance for a greater liability, and then copyright law, and that includes all kinds of materials, written and photographic, video, whatnot. So we're there. So that's kind of the roadmap that Max has taken us to. What's our next step?
We've hit a lot of the issues that I see most frequently for beginning entrepreneurs. I'm looking to my left because I just gave a talk at FIU to an entrepreneurship incubator there. And those are really kind of the core issues that I see very, very early on. We didn't talk about employment law. If you're going to have employees, that's its own can of worms. And taking on outside investment, if you're going to have outside investors, again, those core operating documents, bylaws for a company, share purchase agreements if it's a corporation, different agreements, operating agreement if it's an LLC. So those two issues come up all the time, and employment law is crucial. As soon as you have employees, you kind of do need to bone up on that and make sure that your general outside counsel or that you have an employment lawyer who is capable of giving you advice there, because particularly down here in Florida, there's a very, very active plaintiff side employment bar, and they have essentially been deputized by the law to go after cases of wage and overtime fraud or certain situations where you can get hit with a $50,000 lawsuit that you have no shot in just because you misclassified an employee or didn't pay wages or overtime correctly. So it's very, very important as soon as you have employees to keep an eye on that.
Awesome. So as we build our coaching practice and we get to hire those employees, that would be the next step. In the meantime, very important, all of us are going to have a different situation, different circumstance. This is mainly general, but the key is that if anything, that we have awakened to you the curiosity of the importance of talking to a business lawyer, somebody that has your best interest in mind, that puts you at the center of what they do with the gift that they have, to help you stay in lane and focus at 100 or 1,000 miles an hour, whichever speed you want to go on, but off the wall, to make sure that you don't get yourself hurt. So, Max, how do we get a hold of you if we want to reach out for additional information, or more importantly, to ask for your business?
For sure. It's maxlevinelaw.com, maxlevinelaw.com. And I'm also Max Levine Law on Instagram, and to my daughter's embarrassment on TikTok as well. Those are the easiest ways to reach out to me. I have a little form to fill out to tell me what you'd like to talk about, and then we can set an appointment to discuss if there's a good fit.
All right, fantabulous. Thank you so very much. I appreciate your time. We appreciate your enlightenment and your guidance, and I'm most positive that we will have you back in the near future. So stay tuned.
For sure. And if you guys don't mind, at some point, I always have to say this, obviously, Victor alluded to it. It's not legal advice, it's background information. It's just education so that you can approach an attorney and talk to them about your specific situation, because obviously law depends on the facts, and we need to know a little bit more about any specific situation before giving advice on that.
Awesome. All right.
Thank you, guys.
Sounds good.
Yes, thank you. Oh, thank you very much. It's enlightening. So I even have an actionable item.
That's awesome. All right. Well, speaking of that embarrassed daughter, she's messaging me now. So I got to get on my way pretty soon. But I really appreciate the time, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You too, Max. Thank you very much.
Take care.
And Michael, nice meeting you.
Same here. Take care.
Mike, stay.
Yeah. I'm now
staying,
scared
right?
to death, man. This dude, you get talking about all these things. I got to go back through my whole website.
I know, you and I both, because he just reminded me of this. Are we going to finish this, or
I think
we're gonna do the
this
end.
one here, man. I think with your intro. Do you want to just add a real quick? Well, I think we're good, man.
I think it's a call to action. What did you learn about yourself today?
Okay. It's still
What can you
recording.
do? Still recording? Yeah. So let me. So Max, think again. Here's the deal. We had a great conversation, and there's a great deal of information. But what is your takeaway? What is one actionable item that you have got to do to make sure that you create that sound foundation for your business? I'm taking away that I gotta go check my website and make sure that I am within guidelines for the copyright law. Because if not, I gotta call Max. So that's it. I don't know what to say.
No, man, I hear you. I think that was a very insightful conversation. I think we both have some things to get going on, and I think our viewers have should be looking at this with eyes wide open as they move forward into their business. I think he made the point that you need experts to help you set up a successful business, and your goal is to be successful and to make money. That's the point. And if you're successful, you have a bigger target painted on your back the more successful you are. So
yeah, one point that I really want to make, as much as I hate this word cheap, is here's a point where you don't want to be cheap. You want to make sure that you make that investment in getting a successful business lawyer that has your best interest in mind. So for those of us that may have a belief that lawyers are there to take your money, so perhaps you ought to coach yourself on that and figure out how to make that lawyer work for you. And in this case, creating the sound foundation before your whole castle comes down, because something as little can create a bigger of a problem. Like Max says, sometimes he wants to. I don't know what the word was it that he used. Strangle some of his clients because of what they do. So invest in your business by having a sound foundation on the legal vital. So that's it.
all right, until next time, I'm Michael Waddington.
And I'm Victor Gonzalez Galeano.